What if the version of human history you carry in your mind is nothing more than the last surviving chapter of a much older book? What if the rise of cities, writing, and civilization wasn't the beginning of our story, but the echo of something far greater, something erased, buried, or deliberately rewritten long before we were born? Imagine peeling back the familiar timeline, only to find a landscape where gods walked among humans, where knowledge came from the sky, and where entire civilizations rose and fell before our textbooks even begin. Throughout ancient myths, from Sumer to Egypt, from the high Andes to the islands of the Pacific, there are whispers of beings who descended to earth, of watchers who taught forbidden knowledge, and of floods that wiped clean everything they had built. The further you look, the more the pieces begin to fit together, as if all these stories were fragments of a single truth scattered across continents and ages. And perhaps the greatest shock is not that these stories exist, but that we were trained to ignore them. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. It begins with a landscape most people never think about. The world before memory, before writing, before the stories we inherited were carved into tablets or whispered beside temple fires. Imagine the Earth not as a planet waiting for humans to appear, but as a stage on which countless dramas had already unfolded long before our species even learned to stand upright. When you picture that deep time, you begin to feel the uncomfortable possibility that what we call the beginning might only be the most recent dawn in a chain of forgotten civilizations. The first thing that breaks the illusion is the growing weight of global mythology. Different cultures separated by oceans and millennia, telling the same stories of descending beings, impossible knowledge, and a catastrophic reset. It's as if the planet itself keeps leaving hints in the cracks of geology and the ruins half buried beneath newer ruins, waiting for someone willing to read the world like a palimpsest. When archaeologists walk through places like Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley, they often talk about layers, older cities beneath newer ones, older graves beneath the graves that replaced them. But what if the layering doesn't stop with the oldest bricks we've uncovered? What if beneath those, beneath the floors of the first temples, beneath the earliest human settlements we currently acknowledge, there was another chapter we haven't dug deep enough to find? It's a question researchers rarely ask out loud because it threatens to upend everything they were taught. Still, ancient texts like the Book of Enoch describe an age where those who came from the heavens instructed early humans in astronomy, metallurgy, and the mapping of the stars. These aren't the kinds of details a nomadic tribe accidentally invents. They read like inherited memory, as though someone lived through a forgotten golden age and tried desperately to compress it into stories before the flood wiped the slate clean. Even the cadence of these myths feels strange. When Enoch claims he was shown the ends of the earth, many dismiss it as metaphor. Yet the geographic descriptions are too specific, too anchored in real landscapes to be brushed aside. In certain passages, he describes rising from the desert and seeing mountains that resemble known formations. He writes of rivers whose sources appear in places we can identify. If it was imagination, It was an imagination informed by exact observation. And when he speaks of beings that watched humanity and then went against their purpose by crossing a boundary they were never meant to cross, it suggests a familiarity with a technology or presence that we no longer possess. The story becomes even stranger when the text claims that their children, the Nephilim, were giants, towering hybrids with appetites that threatened the world. Most scholars interpret this symbolically. But symbolism doesn't explain why so many cultures, separated by impossible distances, describe beings of extraordinary size with frightening consistency. The idea of giants is uncomfortable in modern conversation because it requires us to question the limits of what species could have existed or been engineered. Yet early explorers like Marco Polo recorded encounters with towering tribes, and Native American legends across the continent speak of red-haired giants defeated in ancient battles. The detail that these beings were cannibalistic appears again and again, as if carried through a lineage of warnings. Could these stories be embellished memories of a hominin branch we haven't acknowledged? Or were they evidence of something entirely different, a hybrid offspring of beings who were not fully human? When you follow these threads too far, you eventually collide with the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, the gods who came from the sky, and their repeated involvement in human affairs. The Sumerians documented their world with an almost obsessive precision. They recorded crop yields, trade shipments, stellar movements, and mythic genealogies with the same unwavering seriousness. So when they describe the Anunnaki arriving from a distant world and teaching people agriculture, crafts, astronomy, and kingship, you cannot dismiss it as metaphor without first accepting that the Sumerians themselves didn't treat it metaphorically. They believed they were documenting history. To them, these beings were flesh and blood, tall, radiant, capable of living unimaginable spans of time. They were teachers and rulers, but also deeply flawed. Certain tablets describe internal conflicts between them and decisions that led to suffering on a global scale. It mirrors the Book of Enoch in eerie ways, as if two distant traditions are describing the same presence through different cultural lenses. What makes the story more compelling is that many early civilizations insisted they were not the first. The Egyptians spoke of the Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods ruled and built monuments no human could replicate. The Maya traced their knowledge to beings from the stars. Polynesian legends claim that sky canoes brought the first navigators. The Dogon of West Africa described the orbit of Sirius B, knowledge impossible without telescopes. These fragments overlap like shards of a forgotten mirror, reflecting an age when something advanced may have walked openly amongst primitive humans. The question is not whether such stories exist, they are everywhere, but why our modern culture insists they cannot possibly be true. It may be because accepting them requires rewriting the origin story of civilization. Instead of imagining early humans slowly evolving from hunters to farmers, we would have to consider the possibility of a sudden influx of knowledge that appeared fully formed. We would have to imagine an age when humans were apprentices rather than inventors, learning from beings who had mastered technologies we still struggle to comprehend. Perhaps this explains why, around 10,000 BC, at the end of the last ice age, agriculture appears almost overnight in multiple regions. Perhaps it explains why megalithic structures around the world exhibit a precision in stone cutting that even modern engineers find difficult to replicate. These achievements don't look like the work of people fumbling toward civilization. They look like a reboot. But the reboot implies that something came before it, something erased. And the flood myths, over 300 versions worldwide, hint at a global cataclysm that wiped the slate clean. Whether it was caused by natural forces, a celestial event, or the actions of intelligent beings, the result was the same. Whatever existed before was drowned, shattered, and forgotten. The survivors became the seed population for a new era. They carried fragments of memory and encoded them in stories, not knowing whether anyone would decipher them thousands of years later. It's haunting to imagine a world where giants once roamed, where hybrid beings were imprisoned beneath mountains, where flying machines were mistaken for chariots of fire, and where human knowledge was reset because it had become too dangerous. The presence of a previous civilization also explains why ancient sites often appear far older than official archaeology admits. Take Göbekli Tepe, dated to 9,600 BC, built with a sophistication that contradicts the supposed abilities of hunter-gatherers. Its pillars are carved with animals and astronomical symbols, and the entire site appears deliberately buried, like a time capsule from a forgotten age. No one knows who built it or why, but the timing coincides perfectly with the end of the Ice Age and a sudden shift in global human development. It's as if a group of survivors tried to preserve knowledge before the world around them collapsed. Their symbols mirror constellations in ways that suggest long observation of the sky, the kind of observation associated with cultures far more advanced than the nomadic tribes we imagine. Even more unsettling are the artifacts found in regions that should not have been technologically advanced. In Turkey, Ecuador, Peru, and Iraq, there are objects that resemble aircraft, batteries, and precision-cut stones. Perhaps they are misinterpreted. Or perhaps they are remnants of a time when human hands were guided by knowledge from beyond. Many of these artifacts are locked away in private collections, inaccessible to the public. Museums often quietly store them rather than display them. The pattern is always the same. When something doesn't fit the accepted timeline, it becomes an anomaly, catalogued briefly and then forgotten. But anomalies, when studied together, form a pattern. And that pattern points toward a world that operated on a different set of principles, where spiritual and technological understanding were intertwined. Ancient Egypt, for instance, describes Thoth, also known as Hermes Trismegistus, as the guardian of wisdom who brought writing, mathematics, and astronomy. Egyptian priests insisted he built the first temples during Zep-Tepi, long before human kings appeared. The Greeks associated him with Enoch. The Arabs called him Idris. Different names, same figure. A being who walked between worlds, who knew secrets of energy, vibration, and time. When you read these accounts without treating them as myths or metaphors, a portrait emerges of an individual who lived far longer than a human lifespan, whose presence spanned multiple civilizations, and whose teachings shaped the very foundation of what we call knowledge. If Thoth or Enoch or Hermes was real, then he was a survivor or an emissary from that forgotten age. His writings hint at technologies that could manipulate energy, preserve memory, or open passageways between realms. The emerald tablets describe forces that sound eerily like electricity, frequency modulation, or dimensional shifts. And yet these descriptions are wrapped in symbolism because the language of the era did not have the vocabulary to express what he knew. It's like someone witnessing a spacecraft in the Bronze Age. They would describe it as a burning chariot because that was the closest analogy available. Much of what we dismiss as myth may simply be ancient people translating advanced phenomena into the only words they had. If we follow this thread into the present, we must also confront a strange discomfort. What if those beings never truly left? What if they stepped into the background, waiting for humanity to evolve enough to understand their return? Or worse, what if they are watching still, influencing in ways we barely notice? Many legends speak of watchers who withdrew but remained near, bound by cosmic laws not to intervene openly. Their presence becomes more visible at turning points, periods of global shift, upheaval, or transition. If our era feels turbulent, uncertain, and strangely accelerated, perhaps it is because we are approaching another threshold similar to the one that ended the ancient world. Knowledge moves faster than our ability to absorb it. Technology advances beyond our wisdom. And history, real history, not the version in textbooks, has shown that this imbalance always invites intervention. Whether that intervention comes from within or from above is a question that hangs in the background of every ancient text. The Book of Enoch describes beings who were punished for giving humanity knowledge before its time. The Sumerians describe gods who fled before a coming disaster. The Egyptians describe gods who walked among humans until they withdrew in sorrow, saying a darker age was coming. If all these accounts are fragments of a single event, then the world we inhabit now is the aftershock of a forgotten catastrophe. And the clues left behind are not meant to frighten us. They are meant to prepare us, to remind us that we are part of a much older story. As we move deeper into this journey, imagine peeling back the layers of time as if lifting the veils from an ancient stage. Beneath the familiar, beneath the comfortable, beneath the version of history we were trained to accept, there is another world waiting. A world of impossible architecture, lost technologies, hybrid beings, celestial teachers, and stories that refuse to die. A world that whispers the same message across continents. Humanity is older, stranger, and far more extraordinary than we were ever allowed to believe. There is a moment when you study the origins of civilization long enough where the accepted timeline begins to collapse under its own weight. At first, it's just a faint suspicion, an uneasiness that something doesn't line up. You look at the rise of agriculture, the sudden appearance of writing, the abrupt jump in astronomical understanding, and you feel as though you're examining the aftermath of a forgotten instruction manual rather than the slow evolution of a species. It's almost as if early humans woke up one day with a blueprint in their hands, unsure of where it came from, but determined to follow it. And when you trace these threads back far enough, they converge in places where myths claim the gods themselves walked among mortals. Not in metaphor, not in dream, but as luminous beings who taught, judged, punished, and eventually disappeared. What makes these stories unsettling is the consistency with which they describe a world where boundaries between humans and something older, wiser, and more powerful were shockingly thin. Even cultures that supposedly developed in isolation describe visitors descending from the sky, luminous craft streaking across the horizon, and beings of towering size that shaped the destinies of tribes and kingdoms. When you hear these stories as a child, they sound like fantasy. But when you revisit them as an adult, with an understanding of astronomy, archaeology, and human psychology, their tone changes. They begin to read less like allegories and more like eyewitness accounts preserved through the only languages available at the time. Consider the ancient city of Eridu, regarded by the Sumerians as the first city ever built on Earth. In their king lists, they describe rulers who reigned not for decades, but for thousands of years. Modern scholars call this exaggeration. And yet other ancient texts insist that the earliest kings were not human at all, but beings of extraordinary longevity, their lifespans stretching far beyond anything our biology can explain. The Sumerians believed these beings came from the stars, descended into the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, and built the foundations of human society. They taught irrigation, mathematics, metallurgy, and the strange art of observing the heavens with a precision still difficult to replicate. If all of this is myth, it's an unusually detailed myth, one rooted in specific names, locations, and sequences of events. What complicates everything is that the Sumerians weren't the only ones with such stories. In Central America, the Maya described Kukulkan, a feathered serpent being who descended from the sky and taught humans how to build, how to count time, how to measure the stars. In China, the ancient texts speak of sky dragons, beings of immense wisdom who imparted knowledge to the Yellow Emperor. In Egypt, Thoth arrived as a radiant entity, bringing writing and astronomy. In India, the Vedas describe the arrival of luminous gods in flying craft, whose descriptions strangely echo modern interpretations of advanced aerial vehicles. These stories aren't vague. They're not blurry. They are detailed enough to form a pattern so consistent it almost feels deliberate. If humanity was taught rather than evolved into civilization, then the question becomes, who were the teachers? Were they a forgotten terrestrial species, survivors of an antediluvian world wiped out by a global cataclysm? Or were they beings from elsewhere, extraterrestrial or interdimensional, capable of traveling through realms we barely understand? Each theory opens a door into a radically different version of human history. And yet all three possibilities share a single, haunting implication. Humanity has been shaped by hands we no longer remember. One of the most intriguing pieces of this puzzle lies in the sudden disappearance of the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived across Europe and parts of Asia. Then, around 40,000 years ago, they vanished. Not because they were weaker. Evidence shows they were stronger than Homo sapiens, with larger cranial capacity and advanced tool-making skills. Their disappearance doesn't resemble a slow evolutionary process. It resembles an event. Something arrived or occurred that eliminated them quickly while Homo sapiens flourished. What if early humans were selected, not by nature, but by someone or something that saw potential in our adaptability and biological flexibility? What if we were chosen for a purpose we no longer understand? This hypothesis gains support when you examine the genetic evidence suggesting that humans went through a sudden population bottleneck, an inexplicable reduction in numbers, around the same time. Some researchers propose that this bottleneck reflects a catastrophic event, like an eruption or climate shift. Others whisper another possibility: controlled refinement. The kind of refinement one would expect if a species was being shaped, nudged, or directed by an external influence. When you read ancient texts describing humans as the created ones, the molded ones, or the offspring of the heavenly visitors, the implication becomes hard to ignore. It suggests a world where early humans were genetically modified, not metaphorically, but literally. The mythic stories of gods mixing with humans may not be tales of romance. They may be encoded memories of hybridization experiments carried out by beings with far greater understanding of biology. And the resulting offspring, giants, demigods, heroes, may have been the unstable hybrids that the ancient texts insist became violent and unmanageable, leading to global chaos. This chaos is often linked to the Great Flood, described not only in the Bible, but in Sumerian, Babylonian, Persian, Chinese, Norse, Mayan, and countless other traditions. It's as if the entire planet remembers a drowning. And the descriptions of what led to the flood are disturbingly consistent. Humanity had become corrupted by knowledge it was not meant to possess. The hybrids had taken control, the Watchers had defied their mandate, and the balance of Earth had been shattered. The flood, in this interpretation, becomes less an act of divine wrath and more a desperate reset, a forced reboot before the experiment of civilization spiraled beyond repair. If the flood erased a previous world, then the survivors would have inherited not only trauma, but fragments of memory. Imagine being one of the few who lived through such a cataclysm. You would carry stories of giants, celestial beings, and lost technologies, but without the language or tools to preserve them. You would teach your descendants in metaphors, in symbols, in stories woven through ritual and song. Over generations, the stories would blur, but the core would survive. Humanity had once lived under the shadows of beings who commanded the skies, who shaped the land, who walked among mortals like gods. It is from this seed that the world's oldest myths grew. The Greek Titans, the Norse Jötnar, the Hindu Devas and Asuras, the Egyptian Neteru, they all resemble advanced beings more than divine abstractions. Their powers are described in terms that sound technological rather than magical. Weapons of light, flying chariots, the ability to appear or disappear at will. We read these descriptions as fantasy, because fantasy is the only framework we have left. But what if they were describing machinery so advanced it appeared divine to ancient eyes? The more you explore this possibility, the more the pieces fit. Megalithic architecture, structures weighing hundreds of tons, appears worldwide at a time when humans supposedly had only primitive tools. The stones at Baalbek, the precise cuts at Sacsayhuaman, the interlocking blocks at Puma Punku, they resemble the remnants of a civilization with machines capable of carving and lifting stone with ease. Yet the cultures that inherited these sites had no stories of building them. They claimed the structures were ancient, even in their own time. This raises a haunting question. Were these sites built by the survivors of a previous civilization, trying to preserve fragments of a lost world? Or were they remnants of the forgotten world itself? The deeper you dig, the more Earth begins to look like a planet with layers of civilization, each built on the bones of the one before it. Some evidence suggests that civilization may be far older than 10,000 years. Under the ocean near India lies the city of Dwarka, submerged in patterns suggesting deliberate architecture. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni monument shows signs of geometric design. In Turkey, beneath layers of soil, lies Karahan Tepe, possibly older than Göbekli Tepe, filled with pillars and sculptures that defy the idea of primitive builders. And then, there are the desert ruins in Egypt. Beneath the sands near the pyramids, ground-penetrating radar has revealed anomalies, structures, tunnels, chambers, stretching out in patterns suggesting a far more complex engineering system than we once believed. The pyramids themselves, when examined not as tombs but as machines, begin to look like devices, resonant structures aligned with the stars, built with materials chosen for their acoustic and electromagnetic properties. Whether they were energy generators, initiation chambers, or something stranger, their function seems to transcend funerary symbolism. If the builders of these structures were the last generation of an older world, then their goal may have been preservation. They built in stone because stone endures. They buried their knowledge in myths because myths survive disaster. And they encoded their memory in the sky, aligning their monuments with constellations because the stars themselves are beyond the reach of time. What they couldn't preserve physically, they preserved symbolically. This symbolic encoding appears in the layout of ancient cities. Many early civilizations aligned their structures with Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades. These star clusters are mythologically associated with the arrival of gods. But why would so many unrelated cultures revere the same three regions of the sky? What did these stars represent to them? A home? A point of origin? A route? Or a warning? As you explore these alignments, you realize they are not random. They operate like cosmic breadcrumbs leading back to an ancient belief that our world is not isolated, that humanity did not arise by chance, that the beings who shaped us came from elsewhere, and that the memory of that elsewhere was woven into the architecture of the earliest cities so it would not be lost. Yet something changed. For thousands of years, humanity transitioned from open contact with the gods to a period of silence. The luminous beings withdrew. The watchers vanished. Temples once dedicated to living gods became symbolic shrines. Priests who once recorded direct communication began relying on ritual and metaphor. It was as if a curtain had been drawn across the world, leaving humans alone with fragments they struggled to interpret. Why did the watchers leave? Was their task complete? Were they forbidden to stay? Or were they wiped out in the same cataclysm that destroyed the world before ours? Some texts hint that the watchers were punished, imprisoned in deep places beneath mountains or within the earth. Others claim they fled, foreseeing the flood that wiped out their children. Still others suggest they never left physically, only changed their mode of interaction. They became beings of influence rather than presence, guiding from afar, waiting for a moment when humanity would reach a level of maturity that allowed open contact once again. If that is true, then our current era, marked by technological acceleration, global upheaval, and shifting consciousness, may be the threshold they have been waiting for. The return of forgotten knowledge often coincides with moments of crisis. And right now, humanity stands at a crossroads similar to the one described in the ancient myths. Rapid expansion, unbalanced power, and the danger of knowledge outpacing wisdom. It is possible that the Watchers are not returning to save us, but to observe how we navigate the same challenges that once doomed the world they guided. Or perhaps they are here because the cycle is repeating, that every few thousand years, Earth undergoes a reset, and the teachers return to rebuild what was lost. To follow these threads is to walk into a version of history where the past is not a simple progression from primitive to advanced, but a repeating cycle of rise, destruction, and renewal. It is to step into a world where humans have always been part of a larger cosmic ecosystem, influenced by forces we barely understand. And it is to confront the possibility that the stories we call myths are actually warnings left by civilizations that lived through the same patterns we are living now. What comes next, revelation or reckoning, will depend on whether we learn from the fragments of our forgotten past or ignore them once again. If you want to understand how deeply the past has been reshaped, you must begin not with ruins, but with the silence surrounding them. Silence from institutions, silence from textbooks, silence from those who insist that history begins only where their evidence begins. Yet beneath deserts, jungles, oceans, and polar ice lie structures that rewrite that timeline with every stone they reveal. And although archaeology tries to adapt, it often does so reluctantly, because each new discovery threatens to expose a world far older, far stranger, and far more advanced than the neat progression from primitive caveman to modern human that we've been taught. The more you stare at the contradictions, the more it feels like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were having. Because what if the human story doesn't start with us at all, but with those who came before and vanished, leaving only scattered clues to their existence? To see the magnitude of this hidden history, you only need to look at the pattern. Civilizations appearing suddenly with advanced knowledge, as though inheriting blueprints rather than inventing them. Egypt is one example, but not the only one. Ancient Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Corral in Peru, early China, all appear with a degree of sophistication that should have taken many thousands of years to develop, yet emerges in what archaeologists call sudden cultural flowering. And these flowerings happen around the same window in time, shortly after the Ice Age ended, as if something restarted the human project globally. But civilizations arising independently, yet simultaneously, each with signs of inherited knowledge, feels less like coincidence and more like the echo of a forgotten origin. Take the enigmatic ruins of Tiahuanaco near Lake Titicaca. The stones there are cut with such impossible precision that even today, engineers struggle to replicate the technique. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons and appear to have been moved miles from quarries. The walls interlock with a complexity that resembles machine-level calibration, and the myth of the region claims that the builders were not human, but gods who arrived after a catastrophic flood. They razed the first cities, taught the survivors, and then disappeared. Archaeologists date the visible structures to a later era, but indigenous traditions insist that beneath them lie older layers belonging to an antediluvian world. The deeper you dig, the more ancient the ruins become, until even the stones appear as though molded or shaped with a technology we no longer possess. And then there's Egypt, where the Sphinx still sits half-buried in its desert cradle. For decades, the official narrative said the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BC, but geological evidence, the erosion on its body, suggests exposure to heavy rainfall thousands of years before that, during a climatic period when the Sahara was not desert, but savanna. If this is true, then the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by millennia. And if the Sphinx is older, then the builders were not the Egyptians we know, but a forgotten people whose fingerprints appear throughout the world, in Cyclopean stones, impossible alignments, and myths of visitors from the stars. This pattern grows clearer at Göbekli Tepe, where the pillars rise like ghosts from another age. Built around 9600 BC, just after a global cataclysm that wiped out countless species, it represents a level of artistry and astronomy impossible for hunter-gatherers. Yet the builders left no trace of tools, no signs of a developing culture. It appears fully formed, as if built by a people who already had mastery of stone, mathematics, and sacred geometry. The site was intentionally buried, almost as if the builders were hiding something, not from enemies, but from time itself. Perhaps they understood that a new world was coming, one where their knowledge would not fit. Another piece of this puzzle lies beneath the oceans. Off the coast of India, sonar scans reveal a submerged city that predates known civilizations by thousands of years. The layout, with its grids and structures, resembles planned urban development. In Japan, the Yonaguni Monument rises from the seafloor with terraced platforms, right angles, and stairways that challenge the idea of natural formation. Whether these were cities swallowed by rising seas or remnants of an older epoch erased by a flood, they push human history into a realm where myths begin to look like memories. And surrounding all these mysteries are the stories, strange, persistent stories, of beings who walked the earth before humankind had names for nations or gods. They appear in nearly every culture. The luminous ones, the shining ones, the watchers, the sky people, the architects. Sometimes they are described as benevolent teachers, sometimes as rival factions with their own agendas. In almost every version, they become entangled with early humans, and their unions produce hybrids of great power and great danger. These offspring, whether called Nephilim, Anakim, Titans, or demigods, always meet a tragic fate. They either turn violent, become uncontrollable, or threaten the balance of the earth. And then comes the flood, sweeping away not only the hybrids, but the world that birthed them. The consistency of this narrative across continents suggests a shared memory, not a shared imagination. People separated by oceans shouldn't have the same story unless the story came from a time before oceans separated them. The flood, the hybrids, the watchers, these are not random elements. They are chapters of a forgotten saga, preserved in myth because the survivors had no other way to explain what they had lived through. If you examine the flood narratives carefully, they often include details that sound eerily scientific. Descriptions of fire in the sky, the sun darkened, the seas rising, and the earth shaking point to a celestial event, possibly a comet, asteroid, or even a fragment of a larger cosmic body. Some texts describe a second sun or a fiery star appearing in the heavens. Others describe mountains that once stood tall being swallowed by the sea. These echoes align with geological evidence suggesting that around 12,800 years ago, Earth experienced a sudden climatic shift known as the Younger Dryas impact. Whether caused by a meteor swarm or something more mysterious, it triggered massive flooding, megafauna extinction, and the collapse of early cultures. If this event destroyed a prior civilization, then what we call prehistory might simply be the ruins of a world we no longer remember. Some researchers propose that the survivors of that ancient world migrated to the places that later became cradles of civilization. They taught the remnants of humanity how to rebuild. They encoded their knowledge in architecture and mythology. They preserved their legacy in stone because stone survives disasters. And they hid their most sacred secrets in symbols to protect them from those who were not ready to understand. This brings us to the enigmatic figure of Enoch. In the book of Enoch, he describes being taken into the sky by radiant beings. He writes of being shown the mechanisms of the cosmos, the cycles of heavenly bodies, and the secrets of creation. He claims he was taught knowledge to preserve for future generations, a knowledge that would be needed when humanity was ready. And then he disappears, taken by God, as the Old Testament phrases it. But when you strip away the religious framing, you are left with an extraordinary suggestion. Enoch was taken by beings with technology capable of lifting him off the earth, perhaps even showing him the planet from above. His writings include descriptions of houses of fire, vessels of the heavens, and chariots that move without horses. These images, once thought symbolic, begin to sound like primitive attempts to describe advanced craft that leave trails of fire, hum in the air, or move in ways that defy conventional physics. Enoch also speaks of watchers imprisoned within the earth, bound for their transgressions. These descriptions mirror the Sumerian tales of divine beings exiled to the underworld and echo traditions from Greece, Egypt, and the Levant. Everywhere, the pattern repeats. Advanced beings punish their own for breaking rules involving humanity. This raises an uncomfortable question. Why were the Watchers forbidden from interfering? What law did they break? And who enforced that law? Some traditions suggest that Earth is a protected realm, a kind of cosmic sanctuary where a developing species is allowed to grow without interference. The Watchers, perhaps scouts or scientists, were tasked only to observe. But observation turned to fascination to involvement, and involvement to violation. Hybridization may have been an unintended consequence or a deliberate experiment. Either way, the consequences were severe enough to provoke a global reset. If Earth is indeed part of a larger cosmic ecosystem, with rules enforced by beings immeasurably more advanced, then humanity's early history becomes a story of boundary crossing, forbidden knowledge, and cosmic intervention. And perhaps this is why the Watchers were punished so severely. They crossed a line that jeopardized not only their own species, but the trajectory of an entire planet. But while the Watchers were imprisoned or exiled, the hybrids they created left an imprint on humanity, physically, culturally, and spiritually. Many ancient lineages claim descent from these hybrid beings. Royal families throughout history, Egypt, Sumer, China, the Inca, the Maya, claimed divine ancestry. The pharaohs believed they carried the blood of the gods, a literal genetic inheritance. They built monuments not only as tombs, but as tools for preserving connection with their celestial ancestors. In many ways, these dynasties appear less like rulers and more like caretakers of a legacy they did not fully understand. This may explain why certain families throughout history have accumulated disproportionate power. Perhaps they are the remnants of a lineage touched by the Watchers. This lineage may have preserved fragments of advanced knowledge, mathematical, astronomical, even genetic, that allowed them to influence the course of civilization. And perhaps, as some traditions whisper, these lineages are still active today, acting as stewards of secrets passed down through thousands of years, Once you enter this terrain, history becomes less a collection of dates and more a tapestry of hidden motives. Wars, migrations, collapses. They begin to look like movements in a deeper game, one played by forces beyond the reach of ordinary humans. And while the ancient texts present these forces in the language of gods, demons, and angels, the reality might be something more nuanced. Beings with forms, technologies, and lifespans radically different from our own, interpreted through the limited lens of Bronze Age consciousness. Even our oldest religions may be echoes of direct encounters. The fiery chariot of Ezekiel, the pillar of cloud and fire in Exodus, the shining beings who descend to speak with prophets, the star that guides the wise men. These may have been technological manifestations misinterpreted as divine phenomena. If so, then much of what we call faith might be the distant memory of interactions with a more advanced intelligence. This possibility raises profound questions. What if humanity is not alone in its development? What if we are part of a continuum, overseen or guided at key moments? What if the Watchers withdrew not because they abandoned us, but because they were forbidden to intervene further? And most importantly, what if their return is not a matter of belief, but of timing? Across multiple traditions, there are prophecies of a future age when the Watchers or gods return. The Maya called it the Fifth Age. The Hindus describe the arrival of Kalki at the end of Kali Yuga. The Hopi speak of the return of the blue star. The Book of Enoch hints that the Watchers will rise again when the world approaches a cycle of purification. These prophecies do not describe vague spiritual events. They describe beings returning physically, as they once did, to observe or correct the trajectory of humanity. If this is true, then the increasing pace of global change, technological, ecological, geopolitical, may be the precursor to another turning point. Perhaps humanity is approaching the same threshold that triggered intervention in the ancient world. The Watchers may be observing whether we repeat the mistakes of the past or transcend them. And if the past is any clue, the consequences of our choices could reshape the world once again. As we move deeper into this exploration, the boundary between myth and memory continues to blur. The past begins to feel alive, watching us as closely as the Watchers once did. And the world we inhabit, crowded, turbulent, accelerating, feels eerily like the final chapter of a cycle humanity has lived through before. The question is no longer whether the ancient stories are true, but whether we are ready to understand what they were trying to tell us. There comes a point when you sift through enough myths, ruins, and forbidden texts that a different picture of ancient Earth begins to emerge. One that feels less like the preface of human civilization and more like its sequel. It's as if we are living in the second world, or perhaps the third, built atop the remains of a planet that has rebooted itself more than once. And the more you examine the remnants of these rebooted worlds, the harder it becomes to maintain the comforting belief that humanity's rise was a straight line from ignorance to mastery. Instead, it begins to look like something far more unsettling. A cycle of forgotten heights, destroyed ages, and fragments preserved only in stone, myth, and the memories of survivors. The ancients may not have been trying to explain the world they lived in. They may have been trying to warn the world that would come after. If you walk through the narrow gorges leading into Petra, the ancient rose-red city carved into cliffs, You can feel the weight of this lost history pressing from every surface. Most tourists see it as a Nabatean wonder from a few thousand years ago. But some of the rock-cut chambers show signs of far older construction. Cutting techniques so precise they resemble laser scoring more than chisel work. Certain pillars appear melted, as though shaped by immense heat rather than hand tools. Guides dismiss these anomalies as erosion patterns, but the patterns are too symmetrical, too deliberate. And when you ask local Bedouins about the origins of the city, they speak of the old kings, beings who built with fire and vanished long before the Nabateans arrived. It's a small detail, but details like this appear everywhere. Small cracks in the official story revealing glimpses of a time no archaeologist dares acknowledge. The deeper you go into these cracks, the more consistent the clues become. In the Americas, at the site of Puma Punku, massive stone blocks lie scattered like the remains of a bombed-out installation. Each block is carved with precision so exact that even modern engineers struggle to understand the technique. Some stones include interior right angles, perfect slots, and holes drilled with a level of uniformity requiring advanced machinery. And yet, the official timeline claims these structures were built by a pre-Inca culture without the wheel, metal tools, or writing. The skill displayed there exceeds the supposed capabilities of the society by such a margin that the simplest explanation is that Puma Punku is not the work of those who inherited it, but the ghost of a civilization erased before written memory. The same eerie familiarity appears in Egypt. Walk into the Serapeum of Saqqara, a subterranean labyrinth containing massive granite sarcophagi weighing up to 100 tons each. The surfaces are polished to a mirror finish, the corners carved with surgical precision. These were not built with copper chisels and wooden sledges. They resemble the output of workshops equipped with advanced cutting tools, vibration-based smoothing devices, or even machinery capable of levitating immense weight. And yet, these sarcophagi were found empty, as though whatever they once held had long since been removed. The immense effort to create these structures suggests they mattered deeply, but their emptiness suggests something else. Either a burial ritual that required removing the contents, or the evacuation of something that was never meant to remain underground. As you move across the world through these enigmatic sites, you notice something else. Many of them are aligned with stars or astronomical events with such precision that even modern engineers need computational modeling to replicate the accuracy. The pyramids of Giza form an exact alignment with Orion's belt. The megaliths at Nabta Playa track the summer solstice with stone configurations older than Stonehenge. The temples of Angkor Wat mirror the pattern of the Draco constellation. This level of astronomical understanding does not belong to a world in its infancy. It belongs to a world inheriting knowledge from those who understood the sky not as distant mystery, but as navigational map. This suggests a deeper truth. The ancients were not simply stargazers. They were chroniclers of a cosmic event so traumatic and so transformative that they encoded warnings into their monuments. In many cultures, the alignment with Orion, Sirius, or the Pleiades is not merely symbolic. These stars are associated with the arrival of the gods, or the homeworld of the Watchers, or the beginning of a cycle that ended in destruction. Some traditions describe these stars as the gateways, the mirrors, or the place of origin. What if the alignments are not ornamental, but connective? What if they were designed to synchronize Earth with celestial cycles, cycles tied to the arrival, departure, or return of beings whose influence shaped early humanity? As the pieces are laid out, another question emerges. Why did these beings leave? Why did the Watchers stop walking openly among humans? And what happened to their hybrid offspring, the giants, demigods, titans, described so vividly across ancient cultures? Ancient texts give us fragments of an answer. Some say the Watchers were punished for interfering with human development, imprisoned in the earth or bound by cosmic laws. Others claim they fled as a result of their own mistakes, having created beings they could no longer control. And then there are the stories of those who stayed behind, insisting that not all Watchers left. Some remained buried, hidden in mountains, oceans, or deep underground, waiting for a time when they would awaken or be released. It's tempting to dismiss these as myths, until you consider the number of megalithic structures built over geological fault lines, magnetic anomalies, and underground caverns. Why would ancient people choose these specific places? Unless those locations mattered for reasons we no longer understand, either as prison sites, energy conduits, or gateways between realms. There are ancient references to sealed gates of the gods, massive stone doorways that do not lead anywhere physically, but were believed to open into another domain. One such site in Peru, Aramu Muru, is carved into a flat rock face, a door that leads nowhere. But shamans insist it is a gate, one that certain rituals can activate. These concepts gain weight when paired with the shocking consistency of global flood myths. In nearly all of them, beings of immense power, knowledge, or size perish or vanish at the moment of global catastrophe. Whether it's the Titans drowning in Greek stories, the Asuras being washed away in Hindu tradition, or the Nephilim being wiped out in biblical narrative, the same pattern emerges. Hybrids eradicated, Watchers punished, surviving humans tasked with rebuilding. But if these beings disappeared, why do so many indigenous traditions insist that they will return? The Hopi speak of returning star brothers. The Maya mention a new visitation at the end of the Fifth Age. The Hindu texts describe the return of Vishnu in a form not entirely divine, not entirely human. The Dogons speak of amphibious beings returning with boats of the sky. The Maori describe a cycle where ancestors from the heavens descend to restore balance. These traditions aren't describing metaphorical enlightenment. They're describing a physical event. If you follow the whispers carefully, the timeline converges on something even more unexpected, a return cycle tied to astronomical movement. Many ancient cultures track long cycles, the Mayas' 26,000-year precessional cycle, the Egyptians' Zep-Tepi cycle, the Hindu yugas, each pointing to recurring moments when the veil between worlds thins. And our era, based on these cycles, sits at one of those crossroads. Perhaps this is why humanity has begun rediscovering knowledge we should not have forgotten. Vibrational physics, harmonic resonance, quantum entanglement, energy manipulation. All these fields echo principles described symbolically in ancient texts. Could it be that we are reawakening rather than inventing? Relearning rather than discovering? This idea becomes even more haunting when you explore the myths surrounding underground civilizations. Nearly every culture speaks of subterranean realms inhabited by beings older than surface humanity. The Greeks called it Hades. The Egyptians called it Duat. The Hindus called it Patala, filled with luminous beings wielding advanced technology. Native American tribes speak of tribes emerging from underground after a disaster. Tibetan lore describes Shambhala, a hidden kingdom beneath the mountains. These stories may sound fantastical, but in the last century, explorers have discovered vast cavern systems so large they contain their own weather patterns. Entire ecosystems exist miles beneath the surface, and in some of these caverns, structures have been found. Walls, carvings, platforms that do not belong to any known culture. If global cataclysms repeatedly reset the surface, then the safest place to preserve knowledge and bloodlines would be underground. What if remnants of the Watchers or their hybrid descendants retreated into these caverns after the last flood? What if their stories of imprisonment reflect not punishment, but refuge? Some traditions describe them as sleeping kings, hidden masters, or the ones who wait. Whether metaphoric or literal, the implication is the same. The past is not gone. It is dormant. This leads us back to the most provocative question of all. What were the Watchers? Were they physical beings with advanced technology, interdimensional travelers, survivors of a previous epoch? Or something far beyond our current understanding of biology and consciousness? Ancient descriptions portray them as radiant, towering, capable of manipulating energy with thought alone. Some walked among humans like mentors. Others frightened entire villages. Some interbred, intentionally or otherwise. Their technology appears indistinguishable from magic through the eyes of early humans. Flying craft, luminous weapons, devices that could open gates or alter the environment. And yet, they were not invincible. Their downfall suggests vulnerability. Their imprisonment suggests accountability. Their departure suggests unfinished business. As you trace these clues, a picture emerges of a world where humanity was shaped, guided, and corrected by beings who were not omnipotent gods, but powerful entities bound by their own laws and conflicts. They may have been scientists, explorers, refugees, or guardians. They may have wielded knowledge of energy, genetics, and cosmic cycles that would still be considered advanced today. And at some point, they may have withdrawn because humanity was deemed ready to grow without them, or too dangerous to guide further. But withdrawal doesn't mean disappearance. The myths insist they will return. And when they do, the world will face a reckoning or a revelation. Perhaps this is why certain modern events feel like echoes of ancient contact. The mysterious aerial phenomena described by pilots, the unexplained craft detected by radar, the lights that move with impossible agility. Governments acknowledge their existence, but refuse to explain them. Whistleblowers insist the public is being shielded from the truth. And as technology advances, humanity becomes increasingly capable of detecting things that do not want to be detected. If the Watchers are observing us again, they may be waiting for a moment when the Earth reaches a threshold, ecological, technological, or psychological. Ancient texts suggest that their last intervention came during a moment of planetary crisis, and by all measures, our world is approaching such a moment now. Whether their return brings guidance or judgment depends on whether we repeat the mistakes that once destroyed the forgotten world before ours. As the pieces settle into place, history begins to feel less like a record of human achievement and more like a fragile story written atop the ruins of a far older one. And the whispers from that buried world seem to ask the same question again and again. Will we learn from the past? Or will we become another chapter swallowed by the next great reset? If you stand inside one of the great ancient temples of the world, whether it's Luxor, Angkor, Chavin, or even the remnants of forgotten sanctuaries scattered across Oceania, you'll notice something unexpected. The architecture feels less like it was designed for human proportions and more like it was built for someone larger, taller, heavier, or entirely different in physiology. Doorways soar above a person's head. Steps are unusually deep. Platforms rise to heights impractical for ordinary ritual use. It's as if the builders were constructing cities for a species that no longer lives here. And when you begin to pay attention to these oversized features, a strange possibility emerges. Maybe humanity inherited these places rather than built them. What adds to the mystery is the global recurrence of myths describing how early humans were taught by giants or towering celestial beings. These aren't random stories. They are structural pillars of ancient cultures. In the Andes, the Viracochas are described as tall, pale beings who emerged from the sea and brought knowledge of pottery, agriculture, and architecture. In the Levant, the Anakim were said to be massive beings who lived in fortified cities long before the Israelites arrived. In the Pacific, the legends of the Menehune in Hawaii or the giant builders of Nan Madol speak of beings capable of moving enormous basalt blocks with ease. Everywhere you look, there are footprints of a race that no longer walks the earth openly. Archaeologists often dismiss these stories as exaggerations meant to elevate cultural heroes. But the physical evidence tells a different story. In many places, the scale of construction defies the supposed capabilities of the people who lived there. The stones at Baalbek weigh hundreds of tons, some even over 1,000. The trilithon platform appears engineered for beings with technological mastery or immense strength. Yet no ancient text attributes these stones to humans. Instead, they credit the giants, the first ones, or beings who lived in the age before the flood. It's possible that these myths preserve the memory of a hybrid species, the offspring of watchers and early humans, similar to the Nephilim described in the Book of Enoch. These hybrids were said to be physically formidable, intellectually advanced, and tragically unstable. Many cultures describe them as protectors at first, then later as tyrants, driven mad by their own power. Their downfall became one of the key reasons for the great purification that swept through the world, what we now call the flood. If the flood wiped out these hybrids, it also destroyed the infrastructure of the civilization that created them. What survived was scattered, buried, or submerged. Humans who lived through that event might have inherited broken cities without understanding their purpose or creators. They might have mistaken the ruins as works of gods, not realizing those gods were beings who once lived among them. This becomes even more compelling when you examine the ruins of megalithic Europe. In Sardinia, thousands of nuraghe structures rise like towers from an earlier age. Legends say they were built by giants, the Shardana, who lived on the island long before the Romans or Phoenicians. Skeletal remains discovered there in the 19th century reportedly included bones far larger than human norms, though many of these remains vanished into private collections or museum basements. Similar stories appear in Ireland, where ancient texts describe the Fomorians, a race of towering beings with both benevolent and destructive tendencies. Even in the mountains of the Caucasus, folklore speaks of ancient builders whose footprints were as large as shields. Everywhere we look, there are hints of an ancient species that shared the planet with early humans. Whether these beings were biological hybrids, remnants of a previous human-like species, or visitors from elsewhere, their presence looms over the earliest chapters of human memory. And if they existed, then much of what we consider myth is actually historical documentation, cloaked in symbolic language, but rooted in events experienced by real people. Yet the giants were not the only beings said to inhabit Earth in the age before the flood. Many cultures describe luminous beings, entities whose appearance and abilities seem more technological than biological. In the Sanskrit texts, these beings navigate vimanas, flying craft described with uncanny precision. The Mahabharata recounts battles involving weapons that incinerate entire cities with a brightness like 10,000 suns. These sound less like metaphors for thunderbolts and more like accounts of energy-based devices, possibly even nuclear-level weapons. The destruction described in these texts leaves behind ash, vitrified stone, and zones of sterility that modern researchers struggle to explain. One such place is Mohenjo-Daro, where archaeologists found skeletons lying in the streets as if struck down suddenly. Some of the skeletons exhibit radiation levels higher than normal background exposure. The city's bricks appear partially vitrified, melted by extreme heat. And yet, no volcanic event or conventional fire explains the uniformity and scale of the destruction. The same goes for certain sites in Scotland, India, and the Middle East, where fort walls appear fused or glass-like. Traditional explanations describe these as hill forts burned intentionally, but the temperatures required to achieve this level of vitrification far exceed what wood or coal fires can produce. If ancient people witnessed destructive technologies, they would describe them using the only vocabulary available. A weapon that emits blinding light could be called the weapon of the sun. A flying craft could be a chariot of fire. A being wearing an advanced suit or emitting energy could be a shining one. When we strip away the poetic language, the descriptions begin to resemble the activities of an advanced guardian species, a species whose presence was both protective and punitive. This duality appears again and again. Beings who uplift humanity but also destroy entire regions when laws are violated. It suggests a system of cosmic governance with strict rules regulating contact, genetic interference, and the transmission of knowledge. And the Watchers, by interbreeding with humans, may have violated one of the most sacred rules. In this interpretation, the flood becomes a kind of reset enforced by higher powers, not to punish humanity, but to correct the consequences of hybridization and maintain the integrity of the cosmic order. If such governance exists, it may still be active. Many traditions claim that after the flood, the Watchers were confined or exiled, but not annihilated. Some were bound in the depths of the earth, others behind the gates, still others in the stars. Enoch describes their prison as a place without time, where they await a future judgment. These descriptions may be symbolic representations of extra-dimensional confinement or technological stasis, terms ancient people would struggle to articulate. What matters is the underlying idea. The Watchers are not gone. They are dormant, restricted, or relocated. What becomes truly intriguing is the suggestion in these traditions that the Watchers will eventually be released. not as benevolent guides, but as agents of a cosmic cycle repeating itself. In some versions, their return marks a new opportunity for humanity to rise. In others, it marks a cleansing, a final reckoning. In both cases, the Watchers are intimately tied to the fate of our species, as though our stories are interwoven with theirs across time. This brings us to the enigmatic figure of Thoth, whom many ancient traditions connect with Enoch. Some researchers believe they were the same being, one moving across civilizations under different names. In Egypt, Thoth is credited with giving humans writing, astronomy, mathematics, and the mysteries of the soul. In Greece, Hermes is the messenger of the gods and keeper of secret knowledge. In the Emerald Tablets, Thoth claims he came from the halls of Amenti, a hidden realm beneath the earth where ancient masters sleep in immortality. He describes traveling between worlds, teaching humanity and preserving knowledge across cycles of destruction. One passage from the tablets describes a great upheaval. Then the earth shook and trembled, and the lords of the cycle rose from their chambers of stasis. This sounds less like religious imagery and more like a record of beings emerging from long-term suspension. Thoth speaks of a technology capable of preserving consciousness and form across millennia. He also warns that humanity will one day need this knowledge again when the dark cycle returns. If Thoth and Enoch were indeed the same being, or members of the same advanced group, then they may have played key roles in the transition between the world before the flood and the world after. Their teachings may have seeded the civilizations that rose from the ashes, and the monuments built during those early eras, pyramids, ziggurats, temples, may have served as repositories or stabilizers for a world trying to recover from cosmic trauma. This recovery may have taken thousands of years. The survivors of the pre-flood world would have been scattered, traumatized, and desperate. They would have passed down fragmented memories through stories, songs, and symbols. Their descendants, not fully understanding the meaning of these fragments, would have turned them into myth. And the Watchers, forbidden from intervening directly, may have retreated into the background, influencing humanity only through subtle means. But somewhere along the line, something changed. Humanity began to rediscover older knowledge through intuition, through experimentation, through the reawakening of dormant abilities. The Sumerians developed astronomy and mathematics that seem out of place for their time. The Egyptians built monuments with acoustic properties matching modern resonance theories. The Chinese practiced energy manipulation through qigong and acupuncture, echoing principles of vibrational medicine. The Maya developed calendars tracking cosmic cycles with astonishing accuracy. It's as if humanity, driven by an unconscious memory, began slowly reconstructing the lost knowledge of the Watchers. But this reconstruction was incomplete, and without guidance, pieces were misunderstood or misused. Wars erupted, empires rose and fell, technologies advanced unevenly, and the Watchers remained silent. Yet silence is not absence. Ancient texts describe invisible overseers watching from afar, waiting for a moment when humanity either transcends its destructive tendencies or collapses under them. Many modern phenomena, unexplained aerial craft, disappearances, abductions, instantaneous healings, could be interpreted as subtle interventions by beings who cannot openly reveal themselves yet. If these beings are the remnants of the Watchers, or the higher powers who punished them, then humanity may be inching toward another threshold. Our technological growth has accelerated exponentially. Our ecological balance is fragile. Our global systems show signs of strain. And our collective consciousness is rapidly expanding, opening the door to questions that would have been unthinkable a century ago. Perhaps this is why ancient prophecies across cultures converge on our era as a moment of revelation. Not because the world will end, but because the truth will emerge. A truth about who we are, where we came from, and what role we play in a cosmic drama far older than writing, older than civilization, older than memory. What lies ahead depends on whether we can integrate this truth without fear or denial. The watchers may be observing closely, waiting to see if humanity can rise to the level of guardianship once held by the giants, the demigods, the luminous ones, or whether we will repeat the mistakes of the past and trigger another reset. Either way, the ancient world is whispering louder than ever, and if we listen carefully, we may finally understand the message hidden in its myths. You are not the first, but you must decide if you will be the last. There is a strange moment that comes after you spend enough time tracing ancient mythologies, ruins, and cycles of forgotten civilizations. It's a kind of quiet realization, almost unsettling in its simplicity. The past is not gone. It's not even past. It's alive, folded into the present like a dormant layer of consciousness waiting to surface. And once you sense it, even faintly, the world around you begins to look different. Cities, monuments, landscapes, even entire mountain ranges take on the shape of memories buried in stone. It becomes impossible to see history as a linear ascent from primitive beginnings. Instead, it feels like we are walking through the ruins of a world that has risen and fallen more than once, each cycle leaving behind echoes, warnings, and traces of knowledge that modern humanity is only now starting to notice. Nowhere is this more haunting than in the myths of world ages. Nearly every civilization describes a sequence of eras: golden, silver, bronze, dark, each culminating in a transition or catastrophe. The Greeks spoke of the ages of man, the Hindus spoke of the yugas, the Hopi described multiple worlds destroyed by fire, ice, or flood. The Maya charted long cycles punctuated by cosmic resets. These traditions, separated by oceans and millennia, all insist on the same idea: that the world has been remade repeatedly, and that humanity is only the latest inheritor of a much older legacy. When you look at geological evidence, these myths no longer seem symbolic. Earth's history is marked by abrupt climate events, sudden extinctions, and mysterious collapses of ancient cultures. Around 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas event triggered global flooding, megafauna extinction, and rapid environmental change. The cause is still debated: comet impact, solar flare, geomagnetic disturbance, but the effect was catastrophic. Sea levels rose hundreds of feet, swallowing coastlines where early civilizations may have flourished. What we call the beginning of civilization might simply be the beginning of what was left after the waters receded. This idea gains unsettling weight when you examine submerged structures around the world. Off the coast of India lies a vast underwater complex with grid-like patterns and geometric lines resembling a city plan. Near Japan's Yonaguni Island stands a terraced megalithic structure with steps, platforms, and straight edges. In the Mediterranean, off the coast of Malta, divers discovered what appears to be an ancient temple beneath the waves. Each of these sites hints at a world that existed before the seas rose, a world wiped clean by catastrophe. If advanced civilizations existed before the flood, then the survivors would have been forced to migrate to higher ground. They would have carried fragments of knowledge, astronomy, engineering, medicine, and taught them to the scattered human populations struggling to rebuild. These survivors might be the ones remembered as gods, watchers, or shining ones. Their abilities would seem supernatural to people who had lost everything. And if some of them lived far longer than ordinary humans, as myths often claim, then they could have shaped multiple generations, passing down knowledge like guardians of a dying world. But these survivors would also have carried scars, not just physical scars, but cultural trauma. They had witnessed the collapse of a global system. They had seen cities drown, mountains crack, and skies fall. And they may have sworn to prevent the same disaster from happening again. This might explain why many ancient monuments function as calendars, cosmic clocks, or markers of celestial cycles. They are not merely temples, they are reminders, warnings, encoded in stone, urging future civilizations to pay attention to the sky. One of the most striking examples is the alignment of ancient structures with Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades. The pyramids of Giza mirror the belt stars of Orion. The temples of Angkor Wat form the shape of Draco. The Kogi people of South America align their sacred sites with the movements of the Pleiades. Why would cultures across the globe choose the same stars? Perhaps those stars were not just symbols. They were coordinates, entry points, departure points, or the homes of the beings who taught early humanity. But to understand the significance of these alignments, we must explore the concept of celestial cycles. Ancient civilizations tracked the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete. Greek astronomers documented it. Egyptian priests encoded it in the Sphinx and pyramids. The Maya embedded it in their long count calendars. The Vedic texts described it with astonishing precision. These are not the calculations of primitive humans. They suggest a deep, inherited knowledge crucial for predicting cosmic events like meteor showers, solar cycles, or disruptions from passing celestial bodies. Some researchers propose that ancient civilizations tracked these cycles because they had lived through the consequences of ignoring them. A passing object, whether a comet, a rogue planet, or a dense cluster of debris, could have caused the catastrophic floods of the Younger Dryas. If a previous civilization witnessed such an event, they would have encoded warnings in myths, monuments, and rituals. This idea becomes even more compelling when you examine the myth of Nibiru, or the destroyer, described in Babylonian texts, the Egyptian serpent in the sky, or the Hopi red star. These may not be metaphors for spiritual transformation, but memories of a real celestial threat. The Watchers, if they existed, may have been tasked with helping early humans survive such an event. And when they crossed boundaries by interbreeding or giving forbidden knowledge, they may have triggered laws or forces beyond their control. This brings us to the darker side of ancient history, the idea that knowledge itself was restricted. Many traditions describe knowledge as a double-edged sword, powerful but dangerous, transformative but corrupting. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers teach metallurgy, weaponry, enchantment, and astrology. These gifts lead to chaos and war. In the Greek myths, Prometheus steals fire, symbolic of technology, and gives it to humans, incurring punishment from the gods. In the Vedas, divine beings impart celestial weapons to warriors, only to see them misused. Everywhere, the pattern repeats, humans receiving knowledge prematurely, spiraling into destruction, and being reset. If this pattern is real, then the Watchers may have been administrators of a cosmic protocol, one designed to prevent the misuse of advanced knowledge by emerging species. Their mistake was not contact itself, but crossing boundaries that destabilized human development. And the flood may have been a corrective measure designed to restore balance. But what happened after the flood? Where did the Watchers go? Some texts say they were imprisoned, others say they were forced to leave, but a surprising number say they retreated underground to vast cavern systems beneath the earth. Cultures around the world speak of hidden realms: Agartha, Shambhala, Patala, Duat. These are described not as mythic spirit worlds, but as physical places inhabited by advanced beings. Some are said to be cities of light, where ancient masters preserved their knowledge. Others are described as prison realms, where the Watchers sleep in stasis. If the Watchers retreated underground, then they may still exist, silent, dormant, waiting for something. Waiting for a cycle to complete. Waiting for humanity to reach a point where intervention becomes necessary once again. Some interpretations say that when the Watchers return, they will appear not as luminous gods, but as the remnants of a once great civilization familiar with cycles of destruction. But if the Watchers are still here, then the world is not as empty as it seems. This idea becomes more plausible when you consider the number of modern sightings of unexplained craft emerging from oceans, lakes, or mountains. Military pilots describe objects that defy known physics, moving between air and water without resistance. Geologists record unexplained seismic patterns beneath certain mountain ranges. Deep-sea researchers detect anomalies, heat signatures, metallic echoes, far below reachable depths. Perhaps these are not extraterrestrial visitors, but inhabitants of a world beneath our feet, watching quietly as humanity reaches a critical threshold. And that threshold is approaching fast. Humanity's technological growth has accelerated beyond anything seen before. In a matter of decades, we have gone from analog to digital, from local to global, from mechanical to quantum. We have built machines that manipulate atoms, devices that communicate instantly across continents, and tools that pierce the darkness of space. We have revived sciences that echo ancient practices: energy healing, vibrational medicine, meditation that alters brain states. It's as if forgotten knowledge is resurfacing spontaneously in human consciousness. But rapid growth comes with risk. The ancients warned that knowledge without wisdom leads to catastrophe. Some traditions say that when humanity reaches the same level of instability that preceded the flood, the Watchers or higher powers will intervene. Whether that intervention is guidance or correction depends on how humanity chooses to use its newfound capabilities. This possibility raises an unsettling question. What if the Watchers are already preparing? What if the increase in global sightings, the revelations from governments, and the growing public interest in ancient mysteries are not random? What if the world is being primed, slowly, carefully, for the reawakening of a truth hidden for millennia? This truth may not be the dramatic arrival of gods from the sky, but something quieter and more profound. The realization that humanity is part of a much larger lineage, one shaped by beings who navigated cosmic cycles long before our world existed in its current form. And when the cycle turns again, as ancient calendars suggest it will, humanity may once more be faced with the same choice that shaped the world before the flood: evolve or collapse. As we continue pulling the threads connecting watchers, floods, giants, cycles, and monuments, the story grows clearer. This is not merely ancient history. This is a blueprint, a pattern, a warning. And the deeper we go, the more we understand that we are not standing at the beginning of our story, but near the edge of another turning point. The ancients may have whispered about this moment across thousands of years. They encoded it in myths, carved it into stone, aligned it with the stars. They knew that one day humanity would rise again, reach again, and risk again, and they left us a final message hidden across dozens of cultures. The last cycle ended in water. The next may end in fire or in awakening. Which one unfolds will depend on whether we have learned anything at all from the ruins beneath our feet. If you trace the oldest stories of humanity far enough back, beyond the familiar myths, beyond the polished versions preserved in temples and scrolls, you eventually reach a shadowy threshold where memory dissolves into something stranger, a place where the distinction between history and legend blurs, where the world feels both familiar and impossibly foreign. It is in this twilight zone of forgotten epochs that the most unsettling truths hide, waiting for someone willing to step beyond the curated boundaries of official history. And once you cross that line, you begin to understand why ancient cultures worldwide insisted that our world has been rebuilt again and again, as if humanity is a recurring experiment, a spark that keeps reigniting no matter how many times the flame is extinguished. To reach the heart of this forgotten story, we must turn our attention to the places ancient people considered sacred. Not because of religion as we understand it today, but because these sites were believed to be intersections between worlds. Mountains where gods descended, caverns where ancient beings slept, stone circles that marked the arrival of star teachers. Everywhere on the planet, these sacred places carry the same strange vibration, as though shaped by hands that understood the earth in ways we have forgotten. Consider the high plateaus of Tibet. Hidden among the peaks are ruins that predate recorded history. Cyclopean stone blocks forming walls and terraces at altitudes where building anything is nearly impossible. Local monks say these were constructed in the age before the last world ended, built by beings who could travel not only across great distances, but across dimensions. They describe shimmering halls beneath the mountains, where advanced beings reside in a state between sleep and awareness, waiting for the next turning of the cosmic wheel. These aren't metaphors to them. They are memories. And when you stand in those silent altitudes, you feel the presence of something ancient, watching. A similar story unfolds in the deserts of Egypt. Beneath the sands near Giza, a network of tunnels and chambers extends far deeper than the public knows. Explorers who've seen parts of this labyrinth describe massive caverns with walls so smooth they appear machined. Some chambers vibrate with frequencies that respond to human voice. Others contain what look like stone sarcophagi, large enough to hold beings far taller than humans. Egyptian texts speak of the Duat, a hidden realm beneath the earth, where the gods traveled during times of transition. Most dismiss this as symbolic imagery, but what if the symbolism grew from something real? The emerald tablets hint at this directly. Thoth, or whoever authored those writings, describes traveling into the halls of Amenti, where timeless guardians rest in stasis, awakening only when the cycle demands their return. He speaks of stepping through energy portals that shift his body between densities, allowing him to move through solid matter or between levels of reality. To an ancient scribe, these descriptions would be difficult to articulate. But to a modern reader, they resemble technologies, vibration-based portals, suspended animation chambers, and dimensional transitions. The same motifs appear across the world. In the Andes, shamans speak of beings living in the depths of Lake Titicaca, guardians of ancient knowledge. On Easter Island, the Rapa Nui describe their ancestors arriving with the long-eared ones, tall beings with elongated skulls who taught them stonework and navigation. In Australia, Aboriginal legends tell of the Wandjina, sky beings with pale faces and large eyes, who created the world and then retreated underground. These images recur so consistently that they begin to feel less like independent myths and more like fragments of a unified story scattered by time. What makes this story even more compelling is the role of sound. Many ancient structures, from Stonehenge to the Great Pyramid to Chavin de Huantar, were built with astonishing acoustic precision. Chambers resonate at specific frequencies. Corridors amplify whispers. Some tones vibrate stone itself. These were not random coincidences. Sound was a tool, a key, a technology. The ancients understood that frequency affects matter. They understood that vibration can alter consciousness, open perception, even shift physical reality. Modern science is only now rediscovering what ancient sages knew intuitively, that the world is built from energy, and energy responds to resonance. If the Watchers or advanced beings possessed mastery over frequency, then many of the myths describing their abilities make more sense. Moving stones with sound, healing with chants, opening portals through harmonic vibration, communicating telepathically, not as magic, but as resonance between consciousnesses. And if they taught early humans fragments of this science, then the rituals, chants, and ceremonies scattered across ancient cultures are echoes of a technology too advanced to survive intact through millennia of collapse. Yet the Watchers were not the only advanced beings remembered by the ancients. Many cultures describe rival factions, some benevolent, others destructive. In India, the Devas and Asuras. In Persia, the Ahuras and Daivas. In Greece, the Olympians and Titans. These dualities may not represent gods and demons as we imagine, but competing groups of advanced entities with their own agendas. If Earth was a site of experimentation or refuge, then it is conceivable that multiple factions interacted with early humanity, shaping different cultures in different ways. This could explain why ancient civilizations seem to rise suddenly, each with unique but sophisticated knowledge systems. Take the Olmecs, for example. They appear abruptly in Mesoamerica, with colossal basalt heads carved with precision. Their artwork shows figures wearing helmets and suits reminiscent of pressure gear. Their understanding of magnetism predates modern science. Where did they obtain this knowledge? Why do their faces resemble no local population? Why do their ruins align with astronomical events? These questions, dismissed by mainstream archaeology as coincidence, gain new weight when seen through the lens of forgotten contact. And what of the strange elongated skulls found in Peru, Mexico, Malta, Russia, and Africa? These skulls are not simply the result of cranial deformation, as some claim. Many exhibit enlarged cranial vaults, unusual sutures, and bone thickness inconsistent with human anatomy. In Paracas, DNA analysis revealed haplogroups that do not match known human lineages. If these skulls belonged to hybrids, the offspring of watchers and humans, then the legends of giants and demigods suddenly feel less mythical. The existence of such beings raises profound questions about humanity's place in the cosmos. Were we created intentionally, modified, guided, protected, or simply observed as part of a larger experiment? The Book of Enoch suggests that humans were meant to develop without interference until curiosity or compassion or rebellion led the watchers to step across a forbidden boundary. Other traditions echo this concept, that humanity's destiny was altered by beings who acted out of love, ambition, or folly. If this is true, then history as we know it is the result of a cosmic mistake, a deviation from a plan we were never told about. And the flood, the destruction, the resets, these were attempts to correct the imbalance. But something survived, not just humans, but knowledge. Knowledge that appears again and again in the most unexpected places. Throughout the ancient world, there are references to a lost continent, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. These names differ, but the descriptions are strikingly similar. A vast civilization destroyed by water or fire. Survivors fleeing to Egypt, the Americas, India, and the Pacific. A society with advanced temples, flying craft, energy technologies, and a ruling class of semi-divine beings. Whether these stories represent literal continents or symbolic memories of pre-flood cultures, they point to the same truth. Humanity's roots extend deeper than any textbook will admit. Plato claimed Atlantis fell in a single day and night of catastrophe. But what destroyed it? Some say a celestial object, others mention misuse of technology, still others describe a civil war among advanced beings. The details vary, but the theme remains. Immense power, misused or unchecked, leads to destruction. This echoes warnings found in nearly every ancient text, that humanity reaches greatness only to fall over and over because wisdom grows slower than knowledge. And now, in our own era, we face a similar imbalance. We wield technologies that alter DNA, split atoms, simulate universes, and manipulate consciousness. We accelerate without reflection. We innovate without understanding. We may be reenacting the final days of a forgotten age, repeating choices that once led to global collapse. If the Watchers or their successors are still observing humanity, then our modern moment may be more significant than we realize. Across the world, sightings of strange craft have multiplied. Governments have begun to acknowledge phenomena they once denied. Whistleblowers speak of underground facilities, recovered materials, and secret programs. Something is shifting. The silence is breaking. And it may not be because humans are reaching the Watchers, but because the Watchers see that a new cycle is approaching. Some traditions predict a return, not of gods in resplendent form, but of beings who once walked among humans. The Hopi speak of the day of purification, the Maya of the sixth sun, the Hindus of the end of Kali Yuga, the Norse of Ragnarok followed by renewal. These prophecies may not foretell doom, but transformation, a moment when the veil lifts and humanity confronts the truth of its origins. If that moment comes, what will we see? Ancient masters emerging from underground halls, celestial visitors descending from craft hidden behind the sun, the reactivation of dormant abilities within humanity itself? Perhaps all three, perhaps none. What is clear is that Earth's story is far older, deeper, and more interconnected than we've been told. The ancients tried to warn us. They encoded the message in stone alignments, flood myths, sky calendars, and whispering rituals. They told us that past civilizations fell not because they were weak, but because they grew too strong without self-mastery. They told us that beings who once guided humanity made mistakes that cost them everything. They told us that cycles repeat and that the next turning of the wheel is inevitable. But they also left hope. Buried in their stories is the idea that humanity can break the cycle, that we are not condemned to repeat the failures of the Watchers or of the civilizations they uplifted, that humans possess something unique, something the Watchers admired or feared: adaptability, creativity, resilience, and a spark of consciousness capable of surpassing even the beings who shaped us. Perhaps that is why the Watchers intervened prematurely. Perhaps they saw in humanity a potential they wished to accelerate, or control, or preserve. And perhaps the cosmic laws they broke were designed to protect that potential, allowing humans to grow at their own pace. Now, as we stand at the threshold of another turning, the question is not whether the Watchers will return. The question is whether humanity will rise to meet the moment, whether we will remember who we were before the last flood, or whether we will drown again in the consequences of our own unbalanced ascent. The planet remembers. The stars remember. The stones remember. The real question is, will we? There comes a moment, as you sift through the fragments of forgotten worlds and listen closely to the whispers preserved in stone and myth, when you begin to sense that human history is not merely incomplete, it is deliberately obscured. Not by some modern conspiracy, but by the residue of ancient catastrophes so immense they fractured memory itself. Civilizations erased, teachings scattered, timelines reset. And yet, throughout all this destruction, one thing endured: the faint but unmistakable pulse of a lost knowledge carried through myths, encoded in architecture, and embedded in rituals whose original meaning is long forgotten. It is this pulse, persistent and haunting, that guides us now deeper into the labyrinth of humanity's hidden past. To understand the enormity of what was lost, you must imagine the world not as a series of isolated ancient cultures, but as a network of interconnected knowledge streams, all converging towards a central, older source. Many ancient cultures claim that their wisdom came from a previous age, often described as a time of great light, harmony, or advanced understanding. The Egyptians called it Zep Tepi, the first time. The Maya spoke of earlier suns, each destroyed and reborn. The Vedic texts describe cycles of vast lengths, with civilizations rising and falling like waves. None of these stories speak of a linear progression. They speak of cycles, grand, cosmic, and repeating. What makes these cycles more than metaphors is the archaeological evidence slowly surfacing in unexpected corners of the world. Consider the enigmatic ruins in southeastern Turkey, Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, and the recently uncovered layers beneath them. These structures, predating agriculture by thousands of years, show astonishing levels of sophistication. pillars carved with animals, humanoid figures, and abstract symbols that appear to communicate an entire cosmology. Engineers who've studied the stones note that the builders had an advanced understanding of load distribution, acoustics, and placement. But who were they? And where did they acquire the skills to build on such a scale before most humans had even formed settlements? To answer that, we must step away from narrow timelines and embrace a wider perspective, one that considers the possibility that early humans were not entirely alone. Many cultures describe teachers who appeared suddenly after a cataclysm, helping humanity rebuild. These teachers are called different names: Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Oans, but they share uncanny similarities. Tall, luminous, or radiant, often bearded, associated with water or stars, and possessing knowledge far beyond that of the societies they aided. They taught astronomy, writing, agriculture, architecture, and law. They constructed or restored monuments aligned to the heavens, emphasizing cycles and the importance of remembering. Why would they do this? Perhaps because they themselves had survived the destruction of the previous world. If you imagine a civilization far older than the ones we currently acknowledge, one with knowledge of energy manipulation, stone resonance, star navigation, and genetic science, you begin to see how the rise of societies like Egypt, Sumer, and the Maya could have been guided rather than spontaneous. Humanity may not have invented civilization from scratch. We may have inherited it. This inheritance becomes especially clear when you study the oldest myths describing human origins. Again and again, the same narrative emerges: humans created or modified by beings from the heavens, shaped from clay, blood, or divine essence. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki create humans as workers and companions. In Greece, Prometheus molds mankind and grants them fire, knowledge. In Egypt, Khnum forms humans on a potter's wheel while Thoth breathes life into them. These aren't the stories of a species discovering itself. They are the stories of a species being shaped. But shaping is not always perfect. Many myths describe early versions of humanity that were flawed, too large, too wild, too violent, or too short-lived. These experiments echo the descriptions of hybrid beings: the Nephilim, the Titans, the Devas, the Asuras. It is as if Earth was not merely the cradle of humanity, but a laboratory where multiple forms of intelligent life briefly touched, merged, or collided. If such hybridization occurred, then the flood myths take on a new significance. Rather than moral parables, they become the record of a biological reset, an attempt to erase hybrid offspring and restore the balance. This would explain why so many of the oldest myths emphasize purity of bloodlines, chosen groups, sacred lineages. These lineages, like the pharaonic dynasties or the priest kings of Mesoamerica, may have been tasked with preserving remnants of pre-flood knowledge. But knowledge preserved imperfectly becomes myth. And myth, over millennia, becomes simplified, misunderstood, and eventually dismissed. What was once literal becomes symbolic. What was once technological becomes spiritual, and what was once historical becomes forgotten. This forgetting, however, was not complete. Certain clues survived, encoded not in stories, but in the physical world itself. Take the ley lines, invisible geometric alignments connecting ancient sites across continents. Many researchers dismiss them as coincidence, but shamans, monks, and mystics across cultures claim these lines hum with energy. They described them as dragon lines, song lines, spirit roads. Modern geomagnetic studies reveal that many sacred sites lie on anomalous electromagnetic zones. Why would the ancients place temples, pyramids, and stone circles on such locations? Unless they understood something about Earth's energy grid, something we no longer grasp. This idea becomes even more intriguing when you consider that many ancient monuments resonate at specific frequencies. Chant inside the hippodrome of Malta, and you feel the vibrations in your bones. Sing inside Newgrange in Ireland, and the sound becomes amplified beyond logic. Certain pyramids amplify and transmit low-frequency sound. Others absorb it entirely. These structures behave less like ceremonial spaces and more like acoustic devices, tools designed for tuning consciousness or manipulating energy fields. The builders of these structures knew exactly what they were doing, and their knowledge may have come from a civilization far more advanced in understanding Earth's energetic anatomy. But where did that civilization come from? Some traditions say they came from the stars. Others say they rose from the oceans. Still others insist they emerged from underground realms. But the most consistent idea is that they were not bound to the same limitations as humans: longer lifespans, greater strength, deeper knowledge of universal laws, and their disappearance, rather than being a simple extinction, was part of a cycle, either forced or foreseen. This brings us to one of the most profound aspects of ancient cosmology: the idea that Earth is not isolated, but part of a network of inhabited worlds governed by higher laws. These laws, often described as cosmic, divine, or universal, dictate the flow of knowledge between worlds. They restrict interference with developing species. They punish those who cross boundaries. And they reward those who uphold balance. In this framework, the Watchers were beings tasked with observing humanity, not directing it. But they broke that directive, resulting in consequences that reverberated across epochs. If this understanding is accurate, then our world is not merely a sphere of rock orbiting the sun. It is a protected domain, a place reserved for a species with extraordinary potential, but also extraordinary volatility, a nursery for consciousness, a proving ground, a place where civilizations rise, evolve, and are tested against cosmic laws. But if Earth is a proving ground, then someone must oversee the process. And that brings us to the most mysterious aspect of ancient lore: the hidden ones, the sleeping ones, the Watchers who retreated rather than disappeared. In almost every culture, there are stories of beings who went underground, into mountains, into oceans, or into dimensional pockets. These beings are said to sleep until the world reaches a certain point, either crisis or awakening. Why would they wait? Because they are tied to the cycle. Because their fate is linked with humanity's. Because whatever they once did, whatever they once taught, whatever they once broke, must eventually be reconciled. This idea gains further weight when you explore the traditions of reincarnation, soul cycles, and the continuity of consciousness. Many ancient cultures believed that souls return in patterns, repeating until lessons are learned. What if this belief reflects not only individual cycles, but planetary ones? What if the Watchers themselves reincarnate? What if their consciousness returns through bloodlines, through dreams, through intuition? What if they live among us now, unaware of their origins, drawn by the same ancient pulse pulling at humanity's collective memory? The more deeply you explore these ideas, the more the present moment begins to take on a strange glow, as if something long dormant is beginning to stir. Modern phenomena, mass awakenings, global spiritual shifts, breakthroughs in physics, the rediscovery of ancient technologies, feel like the early tremors before a revelation, a moment when the past and present converge. This convergence is echoed in ancient prophecy. The Hopi said the world would enter a time when the stars return. The Maya said humanity would awaken to its cosmic identity. The Vedic texts speak of a transition from the Dark Age to an age of truth. The Egyptians warned of a time when the Nile would change course, a metaphor for the reversal of spiritual stagnation. These prophecies do not describe apocalypse. They describe renewal, a lifting of the veil. And perhaps the most profound implication is this: humanity is not waiting for the Watchers to return. Humanity is becoming what the Watchers once were. Our technological advancements, quantum computing, genetic engineering, neural interfaces, energy manipulation, mirror the abilities once attributed to gods. Our understanding of consciousness is expanding. Our perception of reality is evolving. We are stepping into a role the Watchers once played: creators, explorers, guardians. But with this ascent comes responsibility. The Watchers fell because they misused their power or acted prematurely. Humanity stands at a similar precipice. Our greatest danger is not destruction from outside, it is destruction from within. But the ancients left us a road map, a set of warnings, and a reminder that we have walked this path before. Whether we follow that roadmap or ignore it will determine whether the next cycle brings illumination or another reset. The Watchers may awaken, the hidden ones may rise. But in the end, the future belongs to humanity, and the choices we make as we rediscover the truths buried beneath our feet. The ancient world whispers still. The question is whether we are finally ready to listen. There is a moment when you stand before the ruins of an ancient world and feel the wind sift through broken stones, that something deep inside you stirs. Some old instinct, some faint ancestral memory whispering that everything we think we know is only the surface of a far deeper story. It is a feeling that grows stronger the longer you walk among the remnants of civilizations that should not exist in the form they do. Cities carved from single blocks of stone. Monuments aligned with stars no longer visible. Structures whose builders vanish from history without explanation. It is in these silences, these abrupt disappearances, that the truth hides. And the truth is this: humanity as we know it may be the latest chapter in a book that spans ages far older than anything found in textbooks. To uncover this truth, one must begin with the collapse points, those mysterious moments when ancient civilizations vanished almost overnight. The Indus Valley, with its intricate city planning, drainage systems, and standardized weights, disappears without signs of war. The Olmecs, master artists and stoneworkers, fade suddenly from the historical record. The builders of Teotihuacan abandon their metropolis long before the Aztecs arrive. In each case, what remains is not ruins born of decay, but the skeletal remnants of societies that walked away as if compelled by something unseen. No invaders, no plagues, no mass graves, just silence. This silence echoes across continents. In the Andes, the Tiwanaku culture collapses abruptly, leaving behind precision stonework unmatched even today. In the Mediterranean, the Bronze Age civilizations crumble in a single generation. The so-called Sea Peoples, blamed for destruction, but leaving no clear origin or motive. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom falls suddenly, despite centuries of stability. These collapses align eerily with environmental anomalies. Climate change, magnetic shifts, and what some geologists believe were cosmic disturbances. But what if these collapses were not random? What if ancient civilizations were responding to warnings or signals left by those who came before them? Signals encoded in architecture, astronomy, and myth. Messages decipherable only to those who understood the cycles governing Earth and its place in the cosmos. Ancient peoples built calendars more accurate than many modern ones. They tracked equinoxes, solstices, and lunar nodes with obsessive precision. They watched the sky not as passive observers but as inheritors of a cosmic timetable. The Maya, for instance, did not just map celestial bodies. They predicted cosmic cycles that correspond to shifts in consciousness, geological upheavals, and transitions between world ages. They believed humanity periodically undergoes spiritual metamorphosis, rising from the ashes of each destruction with new potential. Egyptian texts echo this idea. They describe cycles of creation and destruction governed by the Neteru, cosmic forces rather than literal gods. These forces return at fixed intervals, bringing either guidance or cleansing. The Greeks inherited this idea as the Great Year, the 26,000-year precessional cycle. The Vedic texts go further, describing ages of light and darkness, periods when humanity ascends toward higher consciousness or descends into ignorance. If all these traditions share the same framework, then ancient civilizations may have been preparing for something. And perhaps, when their preparation failed or their knowledge fractured, they collapsed not from external attack, but from internal unraveling, unable to withstand the forces of a cycle turning. The Watchers, if they were real, understood these cycles intimately. They lived long enough to witness transitions between ages. They may have tried to guide humanity through them, or, depending on the story, control humanity's development for their own purposes. Their withdrawal from the world coincides suspiciously with the fall of early civilizations and the loss of technologies we can no longer replicate. Did they leave voluntarily, forbidden to interfere further? Or were they forced out by cosmic laws after breaking sacred boundaries? What makes this question more than speculation is the evidence of ancient technological regression. We find artifacts today that suggest advanced engineering: drill holes with spiral striations, glass-like stone surfaces, magnetic anomalies in megaliths, precision cuts impossible with bronze tools. These are the fingerprints of a lost science, one that vanished abruptly. But what if it did not vanish everywhere? Throughout history, there are whispers of secret schools, mystery traditions, and hidden lineages preserving ancient knowledge. The Hermeticists claiming descent from Thoth, the Pythagoreans guarding mathematical secrets, the Druids possessing astronomical knowledge far beyond their era, the Lamas of Tibet who speak of sky metal vehicles and beings of light, the Hopi elders maintaining star maps older than their people. All these traditions survive because someone ensured their survival. What if those someones were descendants, literal or ideological, of the Watchers or the pre-flood masters? What if the ancient world did not end completely but fragmented, with pieces of knowledge preserved by groups sworn to protect them until humanity was ready? This possibility grows stronger when you examine the architecture of secret knowledge. Many initiation rituals around the world involve symbolically dying, descending into darkness, receiving hidden teachings, and returning reborn. These rituals mimic the journey described in the Book of Enoch, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Bardo, and the rites of Eleusis. They reflect a universal story: descent into hidden realms and return with illumination. These hidden realms appear again and again, not metaphorically, but geographically. Caves beneath the Andes filled with metallic libraries, subterranean tunnels connecting ancient sites across hundreds of miles, caverns under Egypt sealed since antiquity, chambers beneath the Sphinx long denied by authorities, vaults in Tibet said to contain stasis bodies of ancient masters. These places are not products of imagination. They exist. They are restricted, sealed, or dismissed because acknowledging them opens questions mainstream history cannot answer. Why would ancient builders carve entire underground cities when they lived in a world of open land? Why hide knowledge in caverns rather than temples? Unless they were preparing for a catastrophe. Unless they knew that surface civilizations rise and fall like tides, and only underground repositories would survive resets. This brings us to the concept of seed vaults, ancient structures designed not to preserve grain, but consciousness. Some temples contain depictions of stars, DNA spirals, and vibrational patterns. Others encode mathematical constants or astronomical data. The Great Pyramid, for example, may not have been a tomb, but a resonance device, capable of amplifying energy or consciousness. Its interior chambers reflect frequencies aligned with Earth's natural vibration. Imagine such a structure used for healing, initiation, communication, or even dimensional travel. If the ancients built machines of consciousness, then what we perceive as temples may have been far more than ritual spaces. They were tools, left for a future age when humanity would rediscover the principles behind them. This rediscovery may be happening now. Modern scientists researching quantum fields, vibration-based medicine, and consciousness mechanics unknowingly echo ancient teachings. Experiments show that human intention affects physical systems, that sound alters matter, that light carries information. These discoveries align with the practices of ancient shamans, priests, and initiates who manipulated frequency, geometry, and ritual to access states of expanded awareness. The Watchers, according to myth, mastered these technologies. They communicated telepathically, traveled between realms, and manipulated energy. What we now call quantum entanglement, zero-point energy, or extra-dimensional physics may have been common knowledge to them. And they may have shared fragments of this knowledge with early humanity. But fragments can be dangerous. If the Watchers gave too much too soon, it would explain why many ancient societies achieved sudden technological leaps only to collapse under their weight. Knowledge without wisdom becomes a weapon. The Mahabharata describes wars resembling nuclear conflict. The Sumerians record divine weapons capable of leveling cities. The Bible speaks of fire from the heavens destroying entire regions. These are the scars of civilizations that reached too high too fast. We are doing the same now. Humanity is repeating the arc of the forgotten world. Rapid technological ascent without equivalent spiritual growth. We manipulate genetics, explore artificial intelligence, and harness energy forces we do not fully understand. This mirrors the warnings encoded in myths. that civilizations collapse when their knowledge outpaces their wisdom. Perhaps this is why the Watchers retreated. Perhaps they realized humanity had to evolve organically or destroy itself. Perhaps they withdrew to observe, waiting for a moment when the next cycle would test whether humanity could transcend the patterns of the past. And that moment is approaching. Ancient prophecies converge on our era not as a doomsday, but as a transition, an awakening. The Maya described it as the return of consciousness. The Egyptians saw it as the rebirth of Osiris. The Hopi call it the emergence into the fifth world. The Vedic seers speak of a rising dawn after a long night. These visions describe a shift not merely in society, but in human perception itself. In such a shift, the Watchers may return, or humanity may rise to meet them on equal footing. Some traditions describe a reunion between humans and the Ancient Ones, not as subjugation, but as integration of knowledge. Others warn of the return of beings who will judge humanity's readiness. Still others speak of hidden masters emerging from underground halls when humanity reaches a vibrational threshold. But perhaps the most profound possibility is that the Watchers are not external at all. That what the ancients called gods or angels were manifestations of human potential in a previous cycle, abilities lost after the flood, but encoded in our DNA. If so, the return of the Watchers may not involve descending craft, but ascending consciousness. Humanity may be approaching a point where latent abilities, intuition, telepathy, energy manipulation, begin to surface. This would explain the surge in global spiritual awakening, the fascination with ancient knowledge, and the intuitive pull millions feel toward forgotten histories. It is as though something inside humanity is remembering itself after thousands of years of sleep. And this memory matters because cycles do not wait. They turn regardless of readiness. A new cycle brings upheaval, but it also brings opportunity, an opening for humanity to break the pattern repeating across ages. An opening to become what the Watchers once were, guardians rather than dependents, co-creators rather than observers. If this transformation is real, then the ancient world did not vanish. It prepared us. It left maps, symbols, monuments, and myths, not to confound us, but to remind us of who we were and who we might become. The flood buried their cities, but not their message. Time eroded their buildings, but not their warnings. Empires crumbled, but their echoes persist in our stories, our intuition, our dreams. And as the world approaches another turning, humanity stands on the threshold of remembering. The ruins beneath our feet are not remains of primitive ancestors. They are signposts pointing toward a future that resembles the past more than we realize. A future where the Watchers awaken not as gods, but as mirrors of what humanity is destined to become. The cycle turns, the past rises, the future calls, and the only question left is whether humanity will step into the role written for us long before the first stone of the first civilization was ever laid. There is a strange kind of stillness that comes when you approach the end of a long journey through forgotten histories. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of understanding. A quiet recognition that the world is far older, deeper, and more layered than anyone ever told you. When you finally stand at the edge of everything the ancients tried to preserve, you realize that the story of humanity is not a tale of steady progress, but a tapestry woven from cycles of brilliance, collapse, amnesia, and rebirth, And now, standing in this final part of the journey, you can almost feel the echo of those cycles vibrating beneath your feet, as if the earth itself is preparing to turn the page once again. To grasp what comes next, we must revisit the earliest memories carried through myth, the warnings left by civilizations that rose before ours. These warnings are not doom prophecies, but observations, patterns the ancients watched unfold through ages. They understood that nature does not operate on human timelines. Civilizations rise with the patience of mountains and fall with the swiftness of fire. Stars shift, oceans rise, magnetic fields wander, species adapt or perish. And through it all, a deeper intelligence, call it cosmic law, universal equilibrium, or something else, keeps the grand cycle turning. The ancients did not fear these cycles. They prepared for them. They built stone monuments aligned with celestial markers to remind future generations that time flows in spirals, not straight lines. They encoded knowledge in myth so it could survive the collapse of language. They taught sacred rituals not as superstition, but as mnemonic devices, preserving fragments of science through symbols. They carved warnings into the architecture of the world because they knew memory fades faster than stone. What stands out when you look across cultures is the idea that each age ends when humanity reaches a point of imbalance, when our knowledge surpasses our wisdom, when our ambition outpaces our understanding, when our creations exceed our control. The flood myths symbolize not just literal water, but the purging of excess, the rebalancing of a world pushed out of harmony. Fire myths represent purification, not destruction. Even prophecies of darkness describe a temporary veil, lifted only when humanity awakens collectively. This framework suggests something profound. Humanity is not a passive victim of cosmic cycles. We are participants. Our consciousness, our choices, our unity or division. These shape how each cycle unfolds. The ancients believed the world resets only when humanity fails to evolve in time. And now, for the first time in thousands of years, we stand on the edge of a new cycle with the ability to influence it consciously. But to influence it, we must first understand the forces at work. One of these forces is memory, not the memories stored in the brain, but the memories encoded in the collective unconscious. When myths across cultures share the same structure, symbols, and archetypes, they point to something older than language. A memory carried through generations like a genetic echo, and among these memories is the persistent image of the Watchers, beings who guided, observed, and sometimes interfered. Whether they were extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or members of a previous human-like species, their influence lingers in architecture, in ritual, and in the unseen frameworks of civilization. Perhaps their greatest legacy is not the stones they carved or the knowledge they imparted, but the idea that humanity is capable of becoming what they once were. Many myths hint at this. Humans ascending, transforming, awakening. The gods teaching humanity not to worship them, but to surpass them. The Watchers warning that their greatest mistakes came from forgetting their own origins. If the Watchers were once like us, then we are not merely their creation, we are their continuation. This idea gains traction when you study ancient practices involving consciousness. Shamans across the world entered altered states to communicate with non-physical realms. Initiates in Egypt underwent rituals that simulated death to awaken higher perception. Yogis in India developed techniques capable of slowing the heart, altering brain waves, or even producing measurable electromagnetic fields around the body. These practices were not magical. They were tools for unlocking aspects of consciousness the modern world has largely forgotten. Modern science is beginning to catch up. Research into neuroplasticity, quantum cognition, and bioenergetics suggests the human mind is far more powerful than previously believed. Experiments show that consciousness can affect random number generators, influence the behavior of particles, and create coherence in biological systems. Meditation alters the structure of the brain. Collective intention produces measurable changes in the environment. These findings echo what the ancients knew, that consciousness is a force, not a byproduct. If the Watchers understood this force, then their abilities, telepathy, healing, energy manipulation, perception across distances, were not supernatural, but technological or biological extensions of what all conscious beings can eventually achieve. Humanity's awakening may not involve acquiring new abilities, but remembering old ones. This memory is resurfacing now. In a world where traditional boundaries between science and spirituality, matter and energy, self and collective, are dissolving. People feel an intuitive pull toward ancient knowledge because the cycle is turning, and with it, humanity's latent abilities begin to stir. This stirring is not random. It matches the pattern of previous cycles described in myth: a return of awareness before a shift, a rising of curiosity, a breaking of illusions. What is unique about our time is that this awakening coincides with unprecedented global communication. For the first time in history, knowledge spreads instantly across continents. Ideas once hidden in isolated temples are now accessible to anyone with a connection. This democratization of knowledge is both powerful and dangerous. It accelerates awakening, but also accelerates confusion. It empowers growth, but also amplifies division. How humanity navigates this moment will determine whether the next cycle begins with illumination or collapse. This brings us back to the Watchers, or rather, to the lingering presence of whatever intelligence oversaw humanity in earlier ages. If these beings still exist, still observing from hidden realms or parallel dimensions, then humanity's sudden global awakening may signal to them that the time of non-interference is nearing its end. Not because they wish to rule, but because the cycle demands alignment. When humanity reaches a threshold of consciousness, the barrier between worlds thins. Contact becomes possible, not as domination, but as recognition. Some traditions speak of a reunion, others speak of a return. Still others warn of judgment, not divine punishment, but a natural sorting based on frequency. Beings of higher consciousness align with those ready to rise. Others fall back into the next cycle of forgetting. These ideas mirror quantum theory, where systems synchronize through resonance. If consciousness is a frequency, then awakening is a tuning process, and the next cycle will reveal who has attuned and who has not. The ancient monuments around the world, the pyramids, the megaliths, the temples aligned with stars, may serve as tuning tools, not for the past, but for now. Their geometry, orientation, and resonance frequencies may interact with Earth's shifting magnetic field during a cycle transition, amplifying certain energies and stabilizing others. The ancients may have built them knowing they would be needed when the cycle turned again. Imagine the world after such a transition. humanity more attuned, more aware, more unified. A civilization that remembers its true origins, not through myth, but through direct experience. A world where consciousness and technology merge, where energy is understood as fundamental, where communication extends beyond words into realms the Watchers once navigated. This is not fantasy. It is the trajectory implied by ancient prophecy, by modern science, and by the intuition millions feel awakening within themselves. But transitions are not gentle. Before awakening comes upheaval. Before clarity comes confusion. Before unity comes fragmentation. The world today reflects this perfectly. Political division, environmental instability, technological acceleration beyond comprehension, and a collective sense that something immense is approaching. These pressures are not signs of collapse, but signs of transformation. They force humanity to confront its shadows, to release outdated structures, and to rise to a level of responsibility the next cycle demands. The ancients would say we are in the final hours of the long night before dawn, that the cracks forming in old systems are not weaknesses, but openings, that the chaos we see is the friction of awakening, and that the Watchers, whether external beings, ancient masters, or future versions of ourselves, are drawing closer as humanity reaches the vibrational threshold for contact. Perhaps this is why ancient prophecies speak of a great unveiling, not a single moment, but a process, a lifting of illusions about history, identity, and reality. We are living in that unveiling now. Hidden truths surface, forbidden knowledge reappears. People sense, without knowing why, that something is waking beneath the surface of reality. The final message of the ancient world is not fear, it is responsibility. The Watchers fell because they acted without restraint. The previous civilizations fell because they forgot the balance between knowledge and harmony. Humanity now faces the same test. We are rising fast, technologically, mentally, spiritually. But can we rise responsibly? Can we balance power with compassion, innovation with wisdom, ambition with humility? If we can, then the next cycle will not be a reset, but an ascension. Humanity will step into a role once held by the Watchers, becoming explorers, guardians, and teachers for worlds yet to come. If we cannot, then the cycle will cleanse once more, and the pattern will repeat until we learn. But the very fact that you've made it to this point, through the ruins, the myths, the forgotten histories, and the awakening of buried truths, suggests that humanity is closer than ever to breaking the pattern. The world is shifting, the cycle is turning, and the knowledge hidden for ages is rising to the surface again. The ancients left the final choice to us, not to the Watchers, not to the gods, not to the stars, to humanity, and perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all. We are not the end of the story. We are the beginning of the next one.